Let's talk about what the hell is going on. So last Friday, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng released onto the world their fiscal event, i.e. mini-budget. The mini-budget was revealed to the House of Commons by Chancellor Kwarteng, and whilst he was on his feet talking, the first signs of market jitters began to show, with the pound heading downwards against the dollar. Not because of the scrapping of bankers' bonuses that nobody, not even the bankers, were asking for, but because by far this is one of the biggest budgets put forward since the Second World War. Instead of making the big energy companies contribute towards the cost of keeping the average energy bill at £2.5 a year, this government has instead chosen to borrow £150 billion to pay for it and make the taxpayers repay the debt instead. So what's the problem with that? Well, there's a couple of issues. The government's earnings come from tax. So if the government makes tax cuts, it means people keep more of their own money. But it also means the government has less to spend on things like NHS, care services and education, which if you're stinking rich may not matter that much. But if your kids don't go to private school and you can't afford private healthcare, then what the government spends on these things is fundamental to your life. It's worth just taking a pause here to point out that one of the main differences between the Conservatives and Labour is that the Conservatives believe in low taxes, low government spending and a smaller government overall, whereas Labour believe in what they describe as fair taxes, comprehensive government services and a big enough government to support all of that. Why? Well, the people who run the Tory party and its biggest donors want to pay less tax and are happy to see reduced services to achieve it, as they can afford to live without most public services. I say all of that to say, when you see Tories cutting tax, it's because it's what they believe in. It's their ideology. Regardless of the circumstances, and it seems the fallout, Tories will always want to cut taxes. And as we've seen, tax cuts come hand in hand with cuts to spending, and cuts to spending leads to cuts in services. There was a time when the government could cut taxes and reduce spending by finding efficiencies, things like making lower level ministers share cars and drivers on a roster system, rather than having a car and a driver specifically assigned to them. The problem is that efficiency savings have been continually put in place for the last 30 years at least. There are no efficiency savings left to find. The only thing government departments can do now to save money is reduce the services they provide. The second issue with a budget this large is that the finance markets expect that along with a plan to cut taxes and increase borrowing should come a plan which details how they will be paid for, i.e. what services will be cut. But instead, the Chancellor basically told the markets, look, I'll tell you how it's all going to be paid for in another 6 weeks or so. That uncertainty alone would undermine confidence in the country's ability to pay its debt. The third issue with the mini-budget is the OBR. First, a little history. In the past, chancellors and governments used to put forward budgets that contained projections compiled by the authors of the budget. So a chancellor could put forward a set of plans and at the same time release projections to show that the plans would end up benefiting the country or a particular section of it. And there would be a big row about whether the projections were correct or if the figures had been massaged. Enter in 2010 the Office of Budget Responsibility. Their remit was to produce 2 5-year forecasts for the economy alongside the spring statement and the autumn budget. As they are independent, they lend a sense of authority to the government's budget as their forecasts are not politically polluted. Now, the OBR had prepared a forecast for Kwasi Kwarteng. It was on his desk on his first day of work, along with a note that said the OBR were happy to produce an updated forecast to be published alongside the mini-budget. Kwasi Kwarteng chose not to ask the OBR to produce their report, which in itself is suspicious. I mean, why would you not want an independent report on the figures that you're asking the market to swallow? So he gets on his feet in the Commons and announces 150 billion in borrowing, but worse, no accompanying independent forecast from the OBR, which would give the markets a clearish picture of where the country's finances will be in 5 years, given the impact of the changes in the mini-budget. So you can see what got them spooked and why the value of government bonds began to fall. In fact, they fell so far, the banks started to ask pension funds to put down some money against the bonds, which are government debts, they'd borrowed money to buy. Now, by their nature, investment funds aren't usually cash rich, so they began to sell some of their bonds to raise cash. This caused the value of them to drop even further. So far, in fact, that if left unchecked, the pension funds would have gone broke trying to sell bonds and pay the banks. So the Independent Bank of England had to step in to save the pension funds. The bank told the market it would buy any amount of government bonds required to settle the market. In the end, it would end up spending £65 billion buying up debt. So that's a £65 billion error the Chancellor made. Where did the Bank of England get all that money? Quantitative easing. Or in other words, printing money. The trouble is, when you just create new money out of thin air, all of the money in existence loses a little bit of its value, further contributing to the falling pound. Additional to this, the markets were expecting the Bank of England to raise interest rates as a matter of an emergency in response to inflation and market turmoil, which in itself caused a panic in the mortgage market, with mortgage rates going up and cheaper mortgages being withdrawn from the market. So what happens now? Well, the Chancellor needs to tell the market what he's going to do about government debt, and the OBR report on his budget needs to be released. I mean, he could do a U-turn and reduce the amount he said he will borrow, which will surely be political suicide, and he will have to resign, thereby reducing the political cover for the Prime Minister. Once the Chancellor goes, there's only her left to sack. Or he could lay out a comprehensive plan to make savings in government spending. In other words, austerity 2.0. It's about to get shitty all over again. The Tories have got to go. Follow me for more.